which I talked about mindlessness as being a bid buster, is to be in the present moment and to be mindful. It's checking in on each other, like taking a pulse check on your relationship, checking in on your partner, checking in on yourself. Like, how are you feeling? What is going on? What is the status of this relationship? What are my needs? What can I ask for help with in this marriage? How can I show up as the best version of myself, no matter how my partner is showing up, to try and repair some of these busted bids? Hi, you're listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast with Shira Bergbauer, episode number 88. Hey mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shira Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. Okay, so I have been thinking about this podcast idea all week, and I really am excited to share about this topic because, one, I think it's very common to get feeling like you're stuck in a rut in your marriage, and I think it's also important to just know that sometimes you can feel like you're going through the motions. I think that's sometimes the ups and downs of marriage and parenting, and it can just feel like, a rut. But I wanted to talk about quiet quitting from the perspective of checking out, like checking out of your marriage, checking out of any relationship, so to speak, why it happens, right? Why do people, instead of leaving, they decide to quietly quit? Like, what can be some of the emotions, some of the thoughts, some of the actions that may be happening that you can recognize whether or not you're silently quitting on your marriage or your other relationships? And how do you course correct? And so first, I wanted to get into the meaning of quiet quitting. According to a Gallup report, quiet quitters make up at least 50% of the U.S. workforce. This conversation around silent quitting has gained traction over the last 3 years since the beginning of the pandemic because of the idea that, millions of people are not going above and beyond at work, and they're just meeting their job description. So the term quiet quitting has kind of spread as far as how people are talking about it on social media, in mainstream media. The idea of quiet quitting has a lot to do with burnout and overwhelm in the workplace, amongst other things. And the problem with quiet quitting at work is that, most jobs today do require some level of extra effort so that you can collaborate with your coworkers, you can meet customer needs. And so, that effect on the workforce, it does end up being like, if your, colleagues are quitting their jobs quietly, then you may still be the only person actually working in your team, right? So the real meaning of quiet quitting is the idea of leaving something without actually leaving. You basically check out, but you're still on the clock. So you're still coming to the job in this context. So if you think about quiet quitting in marriage, it can just be you check out of your marriage. So I want to talk about, first, why would you quit instead of leave? Because I think there's reasons why people might choose to do this. And so I at least want to explore, what would cause somebody to be like, well, I'm checking out, but I'm not going to file for a divorce. I think it's important to talk about that because I think, one of the things I want to convey in this podcast episode is I get it. It's happening. I have clients who have come on consults with me and basically expressed the symptoms that are very evident that they're quietly quitting on their marriage. And, I think it's more common than maybe we let on about where people get in marriage where they don't hate the person per se, they're just kind of checked out. And there are reasons why people choose to quietly quit instead of leaving. And I think it's important to at least understand that, right? So if you are maybe in that position, I hope you understand this podcast episode is meant to maybe help you reflect on, are you quietly quitting? Do you want to stay quietly quitting or do you want to leave? And then if you do want to stay, how can you course correct? So this comes from a very open space in my brain as far as the idea of quiet quitting in marriage and maybe how can we support each other to, it's like that shame conversation where, when somebody says, oh, me too. And then you realize, oh, you're not the only one. So if you are going through this, first of all, I want to tell you, you are not the only one. Based on my end of just the consults that I get to do, you're not alone. And so I want you to be aware that this is a common phenomenon now. And just like we're seeing the spike of divorce rates during the pandemic, I think there's an increase in relationship quiet quitting. And so hope this episode gives you some valuable information to help you make decisions, to help you maybe course correct if that's what you want to do, and to help you maybe not hide in the shame that you're going through right now, feeling like you've quietly quit on your relationship. So the first thing I wanted to think about and explore, just why would somebody quietly quit instead of leaving? And I think the most important thing to talk about as far as why is safety. It can be that somebody is in a situation where maybe they feel like their physical safety or their emotional safety is at risk because maybe they're in an emotionally abusive relationship or maybe they are in a physical abusive relationship. And please, if this is you that is in a physical or emotionally abusive relationship, please, 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 please reach out to somebody for help. Get the help that you need because your safety does matter, right? And I love the idea of marriage, but I absolutely support leaving a relationship that is not safe for you 100%. I think the best decision you can make for yourself is to ensure your own safety. So if you are in that situation, I'm going to link some resources for help in the show notes. If you are in a physically abusive, emotionally abusive relationship, I'm going to link some resources for help at the end of the podcast in the show notes. Okay, so physical safety can be a big concern. The second one can be financial safety. So for example, you are in a relationship and your partner, the person you depend on for your finances. So maybe you're not employed or maybe you are employed part-time. Maybe you are venturing into entrepreneurship and you don't have cash reserves to leave a relationship that you feel emotionally and physically safe. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to stay here because I have to create a financial cushion, or I'm going to stay here because I want to save some money or I want to build my business. I want to leave when I have a certain amount of money. So that can be a reason. Emotional safety can also be not in the aspect of you're emotionally unsafe in the relationship. Maybe you have difficulty making friends. Maybe you have difficulty starting relationships. Maybe this is the only person. Maybe you moved from another country to be with your partner and this is the only person and family you have. And so instead of leaving and going out into the deep, dark world to create relationships, you're like, well, might as well stay here because at least I have someone, quote unquote. Number two could be fear. And again, just going back to safety, but it could also be fear of the unknown. So in my mind, I think about maybe you were married young. All you've ever known is that cocoon of marriage, of having a partner and sharing ideas, sharing money, sharing resources, and the fear of, if I leave, I got to figure all this stuff by myself. If I leave, I got to even figure out how to open a checking account, how to do all these things that maybe you've depended on your partner. And I'm saying this from a very open space that there are women who don't know their finances. And it is a fact. As much as I might not agree with that, it is a fact. There are women who are high earners who don't know what's in their bank account because their partner manages their money. And maybe it's not even in a manipulative relationship. They're just I don't want to deal with that. And so imagine now having to be oh my God, how much money do I have? How do I pay these bills and how do I do that? And it's you know what? I'm just going to go with plan B, which is to stick around and, have the other person do it. So that may be it. Number 3, which I have a bias against, is staying because of the children. I think about my own parents' marriage. I think about like the conflict in their marriage and all the things that were happening. And I guess in my parents' minds, like we couldn't see it, but I feel like children always know like what is happening. Like children always know what is going on in the relationship. However, there are true concerns about, a marriage ending and children being involved, because it can cause conflict in the relationships with your partner, and now the children have increased stress. It can also have an influence in their social or emotional development, where maybe they have to switch schools. Maybe there is a different socioeconomic status as a single parent home versus a dual income family, right? But if the children are also like, maybe there's conflict and tension during the divorce process, that can have a major impact on the children's mental welfare. And so, we're talking about anxiety, depression in kids. So yes, there is concern with parents like, well, I don't want to quote unquote rock the boat because I don't want my children to be impacted. So that does make sense to me. I just think that in my own experience was that maybe they're not thriving the way you think they are, because they're sensing what is happening. If the marriage is toxic, or if the marriage is maybe not safe for you, sometimes the best thing to do is remove yourself from that environment, right? So I can understand like, the concern. And so that's why I said, like, I opened up this portion of the episode by saying, like, these are all just observations about why people would choose to. So if this is you, where you're like, you know what, I want to stay because it's for the kids, just be aware that children are sensitive to constant tension in the home, right? So it becomes a chronic issue. If there is physical, emotional, or physiological abuse, they do suffer the consequence of you being an emotionally stressed person, right? And that level of dysregulation can impact them. And also, like in an environment where the children see tension and conflict, they may also have future issues with intimacy and fear of intimacy, and how are they going to navigate longevity and trust in relationships, right? Because they've witnessed dysfunction. But the same is true, like for them to see like the end of a home. I think it's important to at least have systems in place to protect the children from the impact of the dissolution of the marriage. The other thing that can happen is if there's instability in the household and the children can sense that, right, they can have like mood problems. They can have anxiety. While I know that this is a common reason why people stay, I think we have to point out why staying might not be as protective as we might assume that it is. The other reason I think people might silently quit in a marriage is cultural concerns. So if you think about like societal concerns, first of all, like the societal standards and the idea of the dual parent home with the children, taking a step from that and recreating a vision of a family that looks different might be uncomfortable for you, because the society expects like parents and children, like maybe from media, like the impact of co-parenting, the impact of blending families, like what does that even look like? And just realizing maybe that's not it for me. Other thing can be shame. So different cultures perceive divorce and dissolution of marriage in different ways. And so you may stay just because you don't want to deal with the shame of your marriage has ended and how that might be looked upon by your parents, by your community, by your family of origin, by your in-laws, by, your friends. And the other thing to think about is like a lot of like friendship dynamics when you're married are very much couple related. When there's an uncoupling, there's also the idea like, you might lose 50% of your friends, and 50% of your friends are going to have one version of the story of your divorce, and the other 50% are going to have a different version of the story. So that might be a reason why you're like, you know what, I'm just going to just stay. I thought I should address that first. So what are some common things that you might see in a silent quitting pattern in a relationship. I think the biggest thing is the feelings, and I want to talk about this. And the feelings can range from, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, I think is super, super present. And it's the passive part of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. If you're not familiar with the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, it's the idea that John Gottman and his researchers came up with as like amongst the predictors of divorce. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse are like the end is in sight. And I talked about this on episode number 72. I talked about the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and these are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I think that since, silent quitting is passive, it would probably be mostly contempt and stonewalling, right? Because then you don't have to engage the person, you don't have to talk to the person. It's just like you don't like them, and anything they say, just, you're like, they don't even know what they're talking about, and I'm just like, they're stupid or they're irresponsible, and I don't want to engage that person. And then stonewalling is just like, you no longer speak to them, you no longer respond, you just like shut off. And so if you think about how that would show up, right, it can be evident in a relationship that, oh, this person's actually quit. The other ones that I was thinking about, which kind of go with the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, is disengagement, again, checking out, disconnection. And I honestly think for me, this might be like the worst, is apathy, just checked out. There's no lack of interest or enthusiasm or concern. Like, it's not that you hate the person. It's just like you're indifferent. You just don't want to connect with them. What are some of the actions that you might see in a quiet quitting situation? I think the first one, again, I talked about that, is the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And again, contempt and stonewalling, how that would look like, right? And then it could also be that you're emotionally flooded, but you're no longer in fight or flight. You are now currently in the freeze response, or you just have been in fight or flight for so long that it's like you're numb, right? So you just freeze in the relationship, and again, if you're thinking about like your nervous system does these things like the flooding because it's trying to protect itself from danger, right? So again, it's not like a bad thing to have the freeze response. It's just a way of just realizing like, hey, this is how my body dissociates. Like, I just freeze and basically shell-shocked. The other one that can be very obvious is that you have less bids for connection. Now, bids for connection are so important. They're the fundamental unit of connection in marriage. And I talked about that a lot in the Investing in Relationships series. And that series actually started in episode 67 through episode 71. And then that leads up to the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse episode. So I would highly, highly recommend going back and listening to those episodes to understand what bids for connection are. But if you think about like when we bid for connection, when you silently quit, you just stop trying. You just stop trying to communicate. You just stop trying to ask. It's like you no longer even consider that other person has a thing that they can do or say or have that you might be interested in. You just no longer bid. The other one can be that you're receiving the bids and you're not responding to the bids, right? So you're receiving them and the bids are going unrequited to the other person. If you think about like bids, I think it's important to talk about things that maybe get in the way of bids coming up. I wanted to kind of just go back again, an overview of that. It could be the bid busters, and it could be mindlessness. Like, you're no longer mindful of your relationship. You're no longer mindful of your partner. You're no longer mindful of the meaningful things that you did together as a couple. You're no longer mindful of your partner's emotional well-being. And by the way, I'm saying this from the perspective of you as being the person who has silently quit. It is quite possible in a marriage that both of you have silently quit, right? And for the same reasons why one person might stay instead of, silently quit instead of, leaving the marriage, that other person might be doing the same. So you might be in the situation where you're both like, yeah, we silently quit. We're just like going through the motions. Some of the phrases that you might hear is like, we're just like roommates. We're just like parenting and going through the motions. And It's not that you hate the person. You're just like, I'm no longer going to put in effort in the relationship. So when you're mindless, like that's kind of what it looks like. It's like you're no longer being present to and being aware. It can also be just like avoiding the conversations that you need to be having. If maybe at the beginning of the change in the dynamics of the relationship, there was a lot of conflict and you were not addressing the crucial things that you should be talking about, that can now start becoming present when you've quietly quit, because you're just not having conversations about anything. Like if you're resentful, you keep it all inside. You just don't say anything. It's one of those, like, if something doesn't get done, you just do it and you don't say anything because there's no point in your mind, right? It could be losing interest, losing connections, no longer having rituals together. And it could also be like distancing, where you have geographic distance. Maybe one partner works outside the home and travels a lot for work, and they just don't come home on the weekend. It could be sleeping in 2 different rooms because you can't be around each other. And it could be like complete lack of intimacy, emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, just no emotional or physical connection. So those are some of the maybe actions that may be present in a model where the result is quiet quitting. I think some of the thoughts might be like, it's not worth it. I don't want to fight for this marriage anymore. Or it could be, I don't want to fight anymore. Like almost like, I don't want to fight anymore, but I don't want to leave. So I'm just going to not fight, but I'm also not going to improve things. So that's some of the ways to look at it. Again, the result becomes like lack of intimacy. It becomes emotional flooding. It becomes bids just going unanswered, bids being unrequited, distancing, and just a total disconnect in the relationship. So if you have quietly quit, or maybe you have considered quiet quitting and you would like to change course, I have some ideas, or maybe some feelings and some ways in which you can maybe course correct. And what I wanted to maybe express is that you might have the thought like, yeah, I don't want to fight for this marriage anymore. But it could be a little tweak of, I'm willing to give it a try and see what changes, or I want to communicate with my partner and see if we can come to a resolution. And if you choose not to like stay in the marriage, at least then you give both of each other freedom to move on with their lives without this like, are we in or are we out? Like, what is the status of this marriage? And I think as adults, it's important for us to let the other person in the relationship know where we stand, so that they know, do we want to be their friend? Do we want to because in our marriage, like the friendship is like the basis of the marriage. So if you don't want to be this person's friend and you're not saying it to them and they're just like wondering, I think as adults, we owe each other the responsibility of saying, yeah, no, this is not working for me. I'm out. So how do we course correct? So the first thing I think is to first maybe repair the busted bids. And the first thing, which I talked about mindlessness as being a bid buster, is to be in the present moment and to be mindful. It's checking in on each other, like taking a pulse check on your relationship, checking in on your partner, checking in on yourself. Like, how are you feeling? What is going on? What is the status of this relationship? What are my needs? What can I ask for help with in this marriage? How can I show up as the best version of myself, no matter how my partner is showing up, to try and repair some of these busted bids? The second one is soften startups. And that goes along with, instead of being like a harsh critic to your partner, maybe using helpful complaints to express a need, a want, a concern, and approaching it from the idea of, I just want to troubleshoot for what's not working in our marriage and how can we communicate better. Physiological soothing is super, super important. Again, when you're emotionally flooded and you're constantly in fight or flight, or now you're in freeze response, it is so important to be aware and be like conscious of what is happening inside in your body. Like, are you feeling sad? Are you feeling frustrated? Are you feeling unhappy? What is going on inside? And then how do you soothe yourself? How do you bring yourself back to the present moment and take care of your emotional well-being? So it could be, maybe soothing by taking a walk, meditating, exercising, tuning in, and really going back to that ventral vagal idea of like how to calm your nervous system down. It could be even deciding to start tapping. It could be deciding to use a practice to be kind to your nervous system. In episode 73, I talked about self-kindness and befriending your nervous system. And this is a way of like soothing yourself physiologically. The other way to kind of like think about the conversations that you're not willing to have is really changing your mindset and being willing to have crucial conversations. Coming from the approach of like, I'm not coming in a defensive manner. I just want to solve for problems in our marriage. Number 2 is the idea of small things often, right? Like, I like the concept of the Gottman's idea of small things often. So the fact that like the success and longevity of a relationship is based on the little things, the small words, the small gestures, the small acts that we do every day to create that ratio so we can build our emotional bank account. And so maybe it could be saying thank you. Maybe it could be asking how your partner's day was, asking, what's going on at work this week, checking in with each other, prioritizing like the emotional well-being of your marriage, right? Like when your partner is feeling uncomfortable emotions, what happens? Like, do you feel like you can maybe help them understand what is going in their brains, like what is going on in their brains, and how can you like support them? How can you hold space for your partner, right? I remember in one of the Gottman's things, it was like when you're sad, like the whole world stops. And, when your partner is sad and you want to like support them, like, yeah, like you want to like care about them, right? I think it was anyway, I forget the name of the song, but there was a song like when you're smiling and the whole world smiles. I lost my train of thought on that one, but yeah, like caring about like what is happening to your partner and then prioritizing your emotional bids for connection and being aware of how you and your partner bid for connection and maybe tuning into, oh, that's a bid for connection from him or her, and this is a bit of connection from me. So the other thing I think is important to point out here is counseling or therapy. Like maybe going to a neutral party and having the conversation with each other. Like we want to troubleshoot for the fact that we've both checked out of this marriage. We don't hate each other. We just like done trying. Like how can we preserve the ability to try and keep fighting for our marriage? And if you get into counseling or therapy and you both decide like dissolving the relationship is in the best interest of your relationship, then at least you've given it like a try and you've decided with information how to proceed ahead. Like you've decided instead of quietly quitting, like maybe it's time for both of you to start a new life afresh. I think communication is super important, but I think, that gets overused like, oh, communicate better. But really it's like being willing to listen, being willing to ask questions, right? Being willing to be curious, noticing when you're defensive, noticing how you start your conversations. Are they starting off on a sour note? Is this the predominant theme of your relationship and communication? And deciding like, oh, maybe I don't like the way I show up like this. Maybe I want to change it. Last but not least is like deciding that your relationship is a priority. And I think that is a decision that you both would need to make, but maybe even for yourself deciding this relationship is a priority and I want to like put in my effort and I want to see where I can course correct and then approach my partner about it. And if he doesn't want to course correct, then we have a decision to make in the direction of separating or, ending the relationship versus this is not important. I'm just going to sit around and check out. Because I truly believe like life is, so important, so valuable. I think to live in like, I don't want to call them, I just think like they're like 5-star emotions. I think it's Maggie Reyes that talks about this like 5-star, like I think that we all deserve to be in relationships that feel like a 5-star experience. And if the relationship that you're in, the predominant emotion is resentment, disengagement, disconnection, apathy, that is not a 5-star experience, my friend. That is not a 5-star experience. And you are deserving of a 5-star relationship. For your own like approach and like your worthiness and what you are deserving of in this world, like I just think that I have to offer this to you. Like, give yourself the opportunity to have a 5-star marriage, right? Give it a try. And if it's not a 5-star marriage and it's remaining a 1-star marriage, like, I know you're a smart, beautiful, amazing person. You can find that 5-star somewhere else. You don't need to stay, like, take up residence at, like, the Motel 6. You can take up residence at the Four Seasons. And so I just want to offer that to you. Like, notice how this is a predominant emotion. Decide that you no longer want to quietly quit. Show up differently. Like, decide. And yeah, like, if you really want to, like, change course and you really want to give it a good try, even if the result is the dissolution of the marriage, you will have changed so much as a person by being willing to show up as the highest version. And so I just want to, like, for full disclosure, like, I have some clients who are, like, in the thick of separation, even though, like, one of the biggest things I coach on is relationships. Like, we really spend a lot of time working on their relationships with themselves, right? Being in self-compassion, being in curiosity, being kind to yourself, creating those relationships for yourself, in yourself, before you go out in the world and ask of others to give you that. If you have silently quit in your relationship, if you have quietly quit in your relationship and you want to course correct, I can help you. Seriously, I can help you. Like, we can have this, like, conversation on a consultation call where we go through, what are you doing right now? Is it quietly quitting? Do you want to stay quietly quitting, right? If you no longer want to stay quietly quitting, we're going to explore, like, what are you doing right now that is evidence that you have definitely quietly quit, right? What are you doing right now? And what have you maybe tried that has helped a little bit? Because we want to bring that. Like, we're not going to be like, oh, no, nothing has worked. Like, there are some things that have slightly worked. So we explore that, right? We explore your current patterns in your relationship with your partner. And we uncover, again, like, what hasn't worked. Like, we kind of get rid of that, right? And then we come up to a game plan to get you to where you want to be. Because we'll get you from the idea, like, oh, I'm going to read this book and I'm going to read this podcast and see no change. And so we're going to go to you being coached every week by me, seeing changes every week, rinse, lather, and repeat every single week for 6 months. Listen, if you're ready, like, your best life is on the other side of your consultation call. Your best life is on the other side of coaching. And if we get on this call and we decide, like, oh, we're not a best fit for each other, I will 100% point you in the direction of a coach or another resource that will be helpful for you. I'd love to help you if you've quietly quit and you're ready to no longer quietly quit and you're ready to start showing up in your relationship. You can book a consult with me by emailing me at hello@stethoscopestoswaddles.com, or you can click the link in the show notes, or you can go to stethoscopestoswaddles.com and click on consultation. Either way, I would love to talk to you. I'd love to help you get to your goal of no longer quietly quitting and showing up as the best version of yourself. I hope you have an amazing week, and I hope that this episode lights a fire under you to make a decision for your relationship. And I mean, we are in the last quarter of 2022. Like, finish strong. Like, finish this year strong. Whatever decision you make from a place of action, and you will no longer be passive in your relationship. You're going to be active, whether it's active in the direction of, I'm leaving, I'm going to create a different relationship experience for myself, or I'm staying and I'm going all in. Either way, this decision is going to be so important for the rest of your life. So have a great week, and I will talk to you next week. Bye. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine You and I, every week, working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.